Bienvenidos to another production of Si Se Puede, professional development by the Colorado Association for Bilingual Education, Kokabe. This session is entitled Sheltered Instruction for Bilingual Students Across In-Person and Remote Settings, and is presented by Dr. Loretta Chávez and co-facilitated by Kokabe board member Valeria Praga-Rodríguez. Yo soy Jorge Garcia, Chairman of the Board and Chief Executive Officer of Colorado's Kokabe. Our mission is to advocate for and empower students and communities through the advancement of equitable, asset-based educational policies and programs. We hope that the next hour will both be enlightening and empowering for each of you. And please continue to join us for future sessions of Si Se Puede, as well as our professional development workshop sessions, the Kokabe Cafe. Remember, language rights are human rights. Now, here's Valeria to begin today's session of Si Se Puede.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Jorge. Thank you for joining us today. It's really, really exciting to see everybody here. So hopefully you can see my screen now. Like Jorge said, our session today is about sheltered instruction. This session is being recorded and we will have it on the library in our website, and as well as other sessions that we have done in the past. So we're starting to collect the library of sessions so you can share with your colleagues. I'm Valeria Praga-Rodríguez. I work in DPS as an instructional coordinator, and I'm also a Kokabe board member and director. Here with us, we also have my colleague Liliana Sanchez-Cruz. She's going to be in the chat box, so with any questions or comments that you might have. And my colleague Paulina Rodriguez Canizares will be joining us on Saturday for the Kokabe Cafe. Now, I'm very honored to introduce our main presenter for the day, Dr. Loretta Chávez. Loretta's here with us. If you would like to say hello, I'm going to say a few words about her.
Hi, all. Welcome. I'm glad you're here today.
Dr. Loretta Chávez has been a longtime educator, teaching at the elementary level for 23 years, and now working in higher education level at Metro State for the past 12 years. While teaching in the public schools, she purposefully chose to work at low-income schools where the population of emerging bilingual students continued to grow over the years. She received a bachelor's degree in elementary education and early childhood education and master's degree in teaching culturally and linguistically diverse learners from UNC, a PhD from UC Boulder in educational equity and cultural diversity with an emphasis in culturally and linguistically diverse education was awarded to her in 2008. Recently, she's proud to have achieved the rank of full professor at Metro State, one of only 12 women of color presently to achieve the distinction. So we're very honored and we're very grateful to have you here with us today. I will walk participants through the first few slides, and then Dr. Chavez will walk us through the content of the session. We have created a note catcher where we house a lot of resources and links that will be mentioned today throughout the presentation. So Liliana will be putting this bit.ly in the chat box. It's case sensitive, so make sure that you write it exactly how it shows. In this note catcher, you're going to be sent to a Google document. It's a forced copy, so you can make your own copy. The first page is for you to take notes for the main sessions of our content for the presentation. On the second page, you're going to find a variety of links to different resources that we will be mentioning. So feel free to open this note catcher and enjoy the resources. Again, Liliana will be handling the chat box. She is bilingual, so you feel free to comment and ask questions in English or in Spanish. She will do her best to answer any questions, if not, if we have time at the end, or on Saturday when we have our Kokabe Cafe. Our series is a two-part session where today we're going to be presenting the content. And on Saturday, if you can join us at 9:30 for our cafe, is a more informal space where we're going to invite our colleagues and educators from across the state to share their experiences with sheltered instruction. So we hope that you can make it and join us on Saturday. There's the link as well on the screen. These are the outcomes that we have for our session today. We're going to analyze the how and the why of shelter strategies and why they really support our bilingual and multilingual learners. And we're also going to be exploring some resources of implementing sheltered instruction, both in person and when we're teaching remotely. So in order to achieve our outcomes, we have an agenda. These are the agenda items that we have for today. The first 2 items will be presented by Dr. Chavez. And the third one, when we talk about how to implement in person and remotely, I will be co-facilitating with her. So without further ado, Dr. Chavez.
Thank you, Valeria. So when we think about sheltered instruction, there's lots of different definitions regarding sheltered instruction, but just keeping in mind as we move through the presentation today, basically sheltered instruction, it employs a variety of instructions that basically teachers use to modify their instruction so that all students are able to participate, no matter if they're second language learners, they're SPED learners, no matter if second language learners have very little language, have been in the United States, or their language development, they've just started to learn English, all the way up to students that are about ready to exit an ESL program and or regular students in a regular monolingual English speaking classroom. When we think about also the definition of sheltered instruction, we think about sheltered instruction having teachers, as they think about, again, sheltering instruction, that they have a knowledge of how language will be applied as they teach their language, as they teach their lesson. They also have a knowledge of language acquisition, how a second language is acquired. They also should be knowledgeable about the different stages of language acquisition, being pre-production, early emergence, fluency, etc. And so those are just a few of the things that, as we think about sheltering instruction and the teacher knowledge base, those are some of the things that as we plan sheltered instruction, that knowledge of the teacher is important. There are 4 cornerstones. So let's go to the next slide. So there are 4 cornerstones of sheltering instruction, that being that hands-on activities, engaging activities, where students are basically not just listening to a lecture, but being actively involved as the lesson progresses. Vocabulary is pivotal, and critical. As we teach lessons, beginning, the end, in the middle. Again, that vocabulary development is so important to, especially our second language learners. The visual clues, the clues that we are giving students to, especially our lower level students who are trying to make meaning of our instruction. And whenever we can provide a visual clue with our oral instruction, that is also of critical importance. And then, of course, purposeful grouping. And so grouping in any classroom has to be in different ways, be done in different ways, whether that's bilingual partners, whether that's a cooperative learning group where you have it's homogeneously or heterogeneously grouped with different levels, different language levels, etc. So again, purposeful grouping depending on the objective of the lesson. We can go on to the next slide. When we think about, here, let me move this. When we think about some of the skills that our language skills that we are, obviously, that is one of our main goals as we teach our students, in helping them their language progress in both languages, their first language and their second language. So ensuring that listening and speaking skills, we have to understand that precedes reading and writing. So they have to be able to think about it, listen and understand it, and be able to speak about it, and before they're able to actually read it and write it. So let's go. And then also, again, back to what I talked about just a minute ago, teachers having that clear understanding of each student's language development. Where are they? So whether you're using labels, non-English proficient, limited English proficient, fully English proficient, whether you're using WIDA levels 1 through entering all the way through bridging, whatever levels that your district is using, that you have, that you are aware of the language level that each of your students are at. Therefore, you know the types of scaffold that you need to provide to move them again to that next level. You can go on to the next one. And you can go on to the next one. One thing that we wanted to point out is that this sheltering is definitely a critical method that benefits all emerging bilinguals, but it is for all languages, that are second language, that our students come in with a language other than English. But for example, here in the United States, a lot of us are working on English as our second language. For example, in Canada, many of those school systems are working on French as a second language. So again, sheltering techniques, sheltering instruction is for all languages. Not, sometimes I think we get focused here, especially in the Denver metro area, with just Spanish being our second language, but that these are techniques for all languages. So next we'll talk about the why of sheltered instruction. So let's go ahead and move through that. So again, why is it important to provide language supports to students during content instructions? So let's go ahead and go to the next one. So really, as we think about, again, our instruction, in order for our bilingual and our multilingual learners, in order for them to move forward and to become fluent in both of their language, multiple languages, our teaching opportunities, their learning opportunities need to be purposely planned, and that we are allowing for social language development and academic language development. Let's go on to the next slide. So there is some perhaps a little bit of controversy sometimes when we define the kinds of languages that we want our students to learn. Some people might say there is two kinds, one being social, one being academic. One might say that the social language, which some would define as more informal language, social language, where we have conversation. The students might have this conversation on the playground. And then another type of language is the academic language, and being defined as that is context specific to higher order thinking, speaking, reading, and writing. Some say that social language comes first. Some say that academic language comes next. There are some out there, many researchers, that say it's not a binary, but it's language is language, and that we should be focusing on cultivating all language, whether it be more social, whether it be more academic. So again, fluency in both of these languages is critical for emerging bilingual student success. Again, I say, if the binary here, these two different ones, doesn't make sense to you, just think about, how am I cultivating my students' language development every single day? All right, let's go on to the next slide. So let's, now we're gonna go to Valeria, and she's going to share some sheltering strategies for in-person and remote learning.
Thank you. So yes, in this section of the presentation, we're going to be going back and forth between Dr. Chavez and myself. She's going to present some of the theory, and then I'm going to come in to present some ideas for remote learning. And the reason why we have ideas for remote learning, even though we know many school districts are starting to go back in person, 2021 might be the year of flexibility, and we know that it might look like a hybrid model throughout the year. We might be in person and then have to go back to remote. We know we have some students that are choosing to stay remote for at least the first semester. So anytime you see this connection symbol, I'm going to come in and present some ideas. Dr. Chavez is going to walk us through these 4 very important components of planning and preparing for sheltering instruction for bilingual learners. So she's going to be talking about lesson preparation, interaction, building background, and review and assessment. She's going to give us a little bit of the theory, and then I'm going to present some ideas for implementation in the remote setting. So Dr. Chavez is going to start with talking a little bit about lesson preparation.
Okay. So again, when we think about these components that I'm going over today, again, we have this broad category of sheltered instruction. We have many publishers out there who, well, not many, but there are some publishers out there who are actually publishing materials on sheltered instruction and what that looks like. These components or these features that I'm going to be going over are features from the SIOP model. The SIOP model stands for Sheltered Instruction Observation Protocol. And actually the protocol is an actual observation form that evaluators use to actually go into teachers' classrooms and to see if teachers are employing some of these best practices of sheltered instruction. So the next four components come from the SIOP. And so I just wanted to point that out. If any of you have any, there's lots of SIOP books out there. There's one there's lots for different levels, different content areas. So if you do have access to any of those, this is where the following information comes from with regard to components, some call it features, of sheltered instruction. That first one being lesson preparation. Let's go ahead and go on to the next one. SIOP defines lesson preparation, and these are the features of the component of lesson preparation. Today we basically clearly define content objectives, clearly define language objectives, the appropriate concepts, meaning that what you are presenting for your students is appropriate for the grade level, etc. Supplementary materials, meaning what are the visuals, what are the extra materials that you're bringing in to make sure that all of your students have access to your lesson, whether that means reading books at lower levels, high interest, low vocab, whether that means more videos, more visuals, however you're going to supplement your lesson. So again, those lower level language students have access to your content. Adaptation, again, adaptation of content, that would be how are you, if you are teaching in a fourth grade classroom and you're teaching from a story that's at the fourth grade level, how will you adapt that story, again, so that your lower level language students have access to the content. And then again, planning meaningful activities, again, those engaging hands-on activities. So let's go to the next slide. So every sheltered lesson should begin with a clearly defined content objective, a clearly defined language objective. Objectives are written in student-friendly language and always shared with students towards the beginning of the lesson. And that objectives, a lot of teachers introduce them as learning targets. And so, and basically prompting their students, you know, we're gonna be hitting this target of learning today. Let's go ahead and go on to the next slide. So when we think about content objectives, the first one, we think about that as the what. So what students need to learn about the content topic. Many times we get this content topic from the curriculum that we teach from. We get it from the Colorado Standards or the Common Core Standards. Let's go ahead and go on to the next slide. The language objectives is more like the how. So how will the content objective be addressed? So it's, in some ways, it's also a what of your lesson, but it's what students need to learn when speaking, listening, writing, and reading English in order to learn, to express what they're learning, to express what they know, to practice whatever skill that you're, whatever content that you are teaching in this lesson, and how to apply new information from the lesson that you just taught. The what is how they're going to demonstrate what they have learned, demonstrate that knowledge, and then also to help them to perform academic tasks. So again, thinking about content and language objectives, the content language is a statement that identifies what students should know and be able to do in a particular content area for a given lesson. It supports, again, those standards that we need to address day by day, week by week. It guides our teaching and learning in the classroom. When we think about, as we plan for that content objective, it should be an on-grade level content objective that you are putting together, and it's age appropriate. So for example, if you're teaching in 3rd grade, that objective is obviously appropriate to, you know, a 9-year-old, an 8-year-old. And that, again, going to our standards and then pulling content objectives from those standards. When we think about language objectives, a language objective is a statement that supports students' academic language developed in the given lesson. Again, it's clearly and simply stated orally and in writing, and of course content objectives are as well. And then it supports our second language learners, our emerging bilinguals, the standards that we need to address for them. When we think about, as we plan for this language objective, we really need to remember that as much as we can, each of our sheltered language should address all domains. Listening is usually an easy one to address because we're always talking about something. That's what we do, we're teachers. But we think about the speaking domain, the writing domain, and the reading domain, that in some parts of your lesson you are addressing all of the domains, at least in a small way, so that there is some reading involved, there is some writing involved, and of course there always has to be speaking involved. Speaking, again, is so pivotal. The interactions, I'll talk about interactions in a minute, but again, harkening back to another slide that I had before, is that they're not going to be able to read it or write it unless they're going to be able to think about it, to understand it when you talk about it, and then also to orally speak about it before they're going to ever be able to read and write about it. All right, let's go to the next slide. And please, if I'm going too long, tell me if I'm running out of time here too, Valeria, okay? If I'm talking too long, okay? So then here's just a slide that just that there are some verbs, actually some verbs that kind of, or maybe, I don't know, some people like that you have some specific words that maybe work better for a content language objective, and then others that work better for a language objective. So again, just some ways to kind of organize it in your head about, again, content and language objectives. And then here's just common verb list there that, you know, is just helpful in thinking about the, when you think about content and language objectives, you have to have a verb in there. So let's go ahead and go to, okay. Now, another way that some districts, and this is the way I teach it to my undergraduate and graduate level teachers, is to combine content and language objectives. So in the SIOP model, they separate content and language out as 2 separate statements for any given lesson. For WIDA and more WIDA-esque objectives, we combine them. And I like the way that WIDA combines them, just because I think that these 4 parts that I'm going to go over in just a minute, I think they're vital, and teachers really need to have thought through them as they think about any given language, so that students, again, are acquiring as much as they can out of your lesson with regard to the content and then their language development. So the WIDA way is combine them, and there are 4 parts to a CLO. There's a language function, there's a language form, there's a content stem, and there's a support. And I have another graphic on the next slide that will kind of go through each one of these briefly, so you'll understand the 4 parts better. So a language function basically is a purpose of the language and the lesson. Some examples of a language function can be to describe, to compare and contrast, to explain, to predict, to justify. A lot of people go to Bloom's taxonomy to get examples of their language functions. And there are also a lot of language function taxonomy out there on the internet as well. But again, language functions are really very critical, kind of like the first step of your lesson to say, okay, what is it that I want? What is the purpose of my language, of my lesson? And what language do I want to really hone in on and teach to and speak to as I instruct my students? The next part of a CLO is the language forms. And this is the specific parts of language that you are going to help students with in order for them to be able to do the language function, okay? So again, we think about if I'm asking my students to describe, that's the function of my lesson, then, okay, so what are the language forms that I have to give my students in order for them to be able to describe? So it would make sense that, okay, as part of my lesson, I need to address the language forms of adjectives. I can't say that word. Adjectives. I don't know. That's what adjective. That's not sounding right to me. Anyway, so we want to make sure that then within our lesson we are talking about adjectives. It's on our word wall. It's on the slides that we are instructing from, and we are being specific about what adjectives we want students to use as they do that function of describing. The next one for content STEM, it's the task or the topic of the lesson. And that content STEM comes from your curriculum, and that of course comes from your standards, right? And then the last one that I think that a lot of, this is one of my favorite things about a CLO is that we didn't forget the supports. We didn't forget to think about, oh, what are my students going to need in my lesson in order for them to achieve be able to do that language function, to be able to use those language forms, right? So again, here are just a couple examples of the types of support that teachers need to think about, again, as they're putting together that CLO. We have our graphic supports, maps, timelines, coding, color coding, videos. We have sensory supports, manipulatives, pictures, sentence frames. And then we have the interactive supports where we have our students work in some kind of pair or group. So go on to the next slide. Okay.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Chavez. That's all really good information. And we have some more links and cheat sheets on how to write a good CLO in the note catcher. So feel free to explore those. And here I'm going to show a couple of ways where you can continue to include all these pieces of preparing a lesson and writing your lesson objectives, even if you're in the virtual world, if you're teaching remotely. So this is here on the screen, you see a teacher who's teaching, she's delivering a math lesson via Zoom. So she still wrote an objective. This is a dual language classroom. So also if you're teaching in Spanish and you have Spanish learners, you also want to make sure that you're sheltering and providing the supports. So she wrote, explica cómo puedes combinar números para formar un nuevo número usando la palabra partes. So if we go into this visual, we can see that she incorporated all those pieces that Dr. Chavez just mentioned. She has a function of language. She has a form. She wants students to be using that vocabulary word partes. And then she has, in yellow, we see the sentence stem or the frame that she is offering for students to communicate. And then she has that visual support with the footballs. So students can see if they're looking for that number 9, it's 5, and then what's the other piece? Students can count, and then they have a way to communicate it. So if you're teaching live, you can still, it's important that you communicate this objective. What's the lesson? What is it going to be about? And how are they going to communicate their learning? If you're teaching asynchronously, so if you are uploading some activities to your learning platform, it could be CISO, Schoology, Google Classroom, or any other platforms that you're using at your school or in your district. I have an example here from a CISO activity. So this one is an upper elementary example or lower middle school. So this is an example about the sun and the solar system. So as you can see, we can still include all those pieces that Dr. Chavez was talking about. We still have a language function. We have our forms, The students have to use conjunctions in order to explain why the sun is an important component of the solar system. And we also have some language supports. We have in yellow, they have sentence stems to communicate. And the teacher also included some visual supports there in purple. So students, if they're not able to read the language, they can see these visuals that you can have, at least with CISO. You can incorporate all these icons. So the T is for writing, the microphone is when they have to record their voices saying something. And something that I always try to incorporate when I create activities for asynchronous learning is recording the directions in the other language. So in this case, they're written in English because the lesson was taught in English, but also we have like recorded directions from the teacher in Spanish. And I feel like that's super important because it might help not only the student, but the family access the activity. So that's something that you could do with CISO. I'm sure there's other platforms that also allowed for the teacher to record their voice. It's just the importance of still incorporating all these pieces when you're planning lessons that you're teaching online, either live or recorded. For CISO, something that we included in the package as well is these symbols. These icons are really helpful. I have a kindergartner at home, and when I'm not doing the homework with her, she knows if she only has to write or she also has to record her voice to show her learning, or if she has to make a video, if she has to drag images, or if she has to type something. So these are really helpful for teachers who are using CISO as their learning management system. So I wanted to make sure I included those. And now, in the interest of time, Dr. Chavez, we are okay. We have about 30 minutes left or a little bit less. So we're going to move on to our next agenda item, which is building background.
Okay. Okay, let's go ahead and go on to the next slide. So when we think about building background, this is critical. It's a critical importance for our second language learner. Really for any student that struggles for whatever reason. Our students who are below grade level, monolingual, below grade level students. So again, thinking about linking concepts to students' background and experiences. So again, as we think about each and every lesson, how are we then activating their schema, right? So what they know, what they already know, how they have organized information already about whatever topic at hand. So for example, I was just thinking about this, and I was thinking about, you know, every time I go up I-70 and I see it's right around Morrison, and there's that parking lot over to the side, and then you go to Red Rocks, going that way, east or whatever, and there's that really great rock formation that is all straight, that all has layers, and it has different colors of layers. And I always think about, you know what, I need to stop and take a picture of this, because this is really a great picture of sedimentary rock, a really great sedimentary rock formation. And that, so if I was a third grade teacher, if I was a science teacher in ninth grade or whatever, this would be a great picture that I could show my students. And hopefully they might have been on I-70 at some point in time and seen this formation, okay? So again, thinking about linking it to what they already know, again, to our lesson at hand, our CLO at hand. So again, linking it to their background experiences, and hopefully, I mean, maybe they have seen that. It's just such a beautiful geological formation that I always think about that. I gotta get out and take a picture, and I've never done that. But anyway, so again, thinking about how is it that I can bring in information, my visuals, my videos, whatever I'm introducing my lesson with, again, to tap into that background knowledge. What might they already know about this particular CLO at hand, this particular lesson that I'm going to be teaching. Another component of building background, again, is making that connection between the past learning and the new concepts of the lesson for today. So again, you know, so who could tell me what we learned about XYZ yesterday? You know, what were we thinking when we talked about X, Y, or Z? So again, connecting again the previous learning, whether it was the day before, whether it was last week, to our new lesson at hand. And then also, already previously mentioned, again, building that background has to have a vocabulary component, whether it happens to be that you have your word wall and your word wall has, you have 4 different languages, so you should have a word wall in 4 different languages with visuals, and that's a go-to for you. However, if you have this on the different slides that you have already put together for your lesson, that you go to those vocabulary slides every single day. Even if you've done it already 4 times, it should be a part of every single lesson. It should be part of that building background, okay? So those are the 3 main components of building background. When we think about the instructional approaches to activating prior knowledge, just some things to think about. We want to spend instructional time asking questions, again, showing videos, photos, and anything that will make things clear to our students. We want to read stories, could be fiction, could be nonfiction, explaining background information, again, about the content at hand, what we're teaching about that day. And then having students perhaps do some other kinds of activities to learn more about our particular lesson, our particular content of our lesson, and maybe be interviewing someone. You might provide any materials that you can in the heritage language for those of you teaching in bilingual settings, so maybe you're providing it in both. So again, as we think about this background knowledge, that we are really activating many different parts of the brain so that students are really prepped and primed for, again, the instruction that will follow after our building background. As we think about vocabulary, there's lots of great stuff out there. Just, you know, an example of a really great book there at the top. Again, trying to make things a little bit more active and engaging, hands-on. So here's just a twister game here that you have, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Twister, but you know, you put your leg on one and your hand on another and your other hand on one and your other hand on another. So anyway, just something really simple that you would call out you would have words on top of these colored dots and then calling out the definitions, and then students would then take turns putting their hands and feet where these particular words go. This can be done just with the shower curtain and different colored construction paper dots. So again, ideas to make vocabulary engaging. So again, as we think about our vocabulary instruction, we want to do that before covering specific content. It's actually, that's so important as we think, again, that building background facet of our lesson. It's important for L2 learners to be given background on the vocabulary that heritage English speakers already know. So for example, if you have students who are coming from different countries and you are talking about the 4th of July, they're not going to have any context for the 4th of July, right? So you're again trying to really think through some of those things and really remember that a lot of our students are not going to have the same background students as our monolingual English-speaking students who have grown up here. And then intentional vocabulary instruction related again to helping our students comprehend what they're reading. Again, just so important before we start to do any kind of independent reading, that they really have a good understanding of the vocabulary that they're going to encounter in that reading. Students will begin to develop that core vocabulary over time. Using hands-on activities, graphic organizers, movement, also to teach vocabulary again is so important. Okay, let's go on to the next one.
All right. Thank you so much for all that information. So with that being said, the fact that it's so important that we make sure that we build our students' background and that we access that knowledge that they come with, I'm going to share some strategies from Project GLAD, which is Guided Language Acquisition Design. And these are strategies that are designed to shelter content instruction. And one of the strategies that I'm going to share is the observation charts and the inquiry chart. And they go together because if you do one and then you do the one after, they really benefit, and you're going to see what I mean in a minute. We had this conversation with Dr. Chavez as we were developing the session. So you can use any of these or any others that you know. All these resources might help to engage students in sharing what they know and sharing the knowledge that they come with, and also some questions that they might have about upcoming content of a unit. So you can use your chat box, you can use Pear Deck for students who are, I like Pear Deck for older students, maybe secondary students, because it involves having another window open and typing into things. So Pear Deck is wonderful for secondary. You can open the chat box, you can unmute students, you can do breakout rooms. So the observation charts are pretty much providing students with visuals about the content, the topic that you're about to start teaching. So going along with the example of the solar system, I'm about to start this unit. Even if I don't tell my students I'm about to start teaching about the solar system, I give them an opportunity to engage with these visuals. I always provide the language supports of I notice, which might mean. So ideally when you're teaching in person, this would be like a gallery walk, and students would walk around the classroom and they see different visuals. You group them by theme. So in this case, it's planets. So they might be looking at pictures of different planets and they start talking to a classmate. If you can't do it in person, you can do it remotely, where students either live or in a recording lesson, they're looking at these pictures and they're having conversations where they can start wondering and making predictions about their learning. So you're going to be grouping different images by theme. This would be by planets. You could have things about the layers of the earth. Sorry about that. The layers of the earth. You might have visuals about the sun, always providing those language supports at the bottom that prompt students to talk or write about it. You can also have about the moon and different satellites, and always like, I believe we're going to learn about the moon because I see the moon in the different stages, or I know about the man that walked on the moon, right? Students might not know what they know until they see a visual and they have an opportunity to talk or write about it. If you don't have time to collect images, you can also find a short instructional video. This is a YouTube video about the planets. It's like 3 minutes where like they learn about like our solar system and the main components of it. So that's another option. We just want to make sure that before we ask students questions like, what do you think you know about the solar system? And what do you want to learn about the solar system? If they've never heard the term solar system, at least now they've seen some images. So they know that it has something to do with planets. It might have something to do with the sun. So we want to make sure that we access everything that they know, because again, sometimes students don't know what they know until we provide those supports. So an inquiry chart is very similar to a KWL chart. The main difference is that we don't have the L because we keep working on these charts. After the students tell us what they think they know, we don't say, what do you know? It's what do you think you know? Because there's a lot of room for error. We want to continue coming back to these charts and addressing misconceptions or students that what they might think they know, but they don't really know, and also giving them an opportunity to ask questions. And as a teacher, you gain a lot of information. I was like, oh, everybody wants to learn about the moon. So maybe instead of 1 lesson, we'll do like 3 lessons about it, or I'll make sure to have access to different readings if students are interested. You can do an inquiry chart live with students by having a Google Doc where everybody can type in, or you can invite students to participate orally by opening the microphones in a conversation. You can use Pear Deck where you have a slide that looks like this. What do you think you know about solar system? And students in live, like in real time, they're telling you what they think they know and what they want to learn. So those are just some ideas, because we know that students always come with a lot of knowledge. They might not be able to express it. And if they've never heard about it, at least they've seen some visuals, and we give them the supports to be able to express what they know, what they see, what they notice. So that's what I have for building background. We're going to move along, Dr. Chavez, with interaction.
Those are all really great strategies. Those are really good, Valeria. So the next component that, again, I think there are 9 components for the SIAP model, and we just picked out maybe the 4, we had a conversation about maybe the 4 that we thought were most critical, and for, obviously, that we can give you some good information within the time allotted. So we all really thought that, yes, interaction has to be a part of any lesson for really almost any student, no matter whether they're a second language or not, but the whole interaction piece. And again, thinking about they're not going to be able to develop any of those language domains unless they've had time to interact and to think about it and to talk about it again before they're going to be able to read about it and write about it. So again, interaction, again, SIAP defines those as frequent opportunities for interaction and discussion between the teacher and student, and then also between students. I think that in some classrooms, I don't see a lot of interaction from student to student, and that's something that we really need to think about as we think about interaction for our students in our lessons. Let's go ahead and go to the next one. When we think about teachers or our students and the answers that they give to us as we ask our questions, that we are really always asking for more language, more language, more language. So we might have simple prompts such as, tell me more, or we might have sentence frames already projected on our slides or on our word walls to say, and here the vocabulary. So let's go ahead, and I might be able, perhaps maybe my lower level language student will be more willing if they have a structure to be able to answer the question that I just asked. So again, having a sentence frame where they have to fill in a certain word or more than one word, or having sentence stems where there's a sentence stem at the beginning and then they fill in what they think or their answer at the end. So again, how is it that we are going to always be encouraging our students to do more than one word answers as we throw out our questions and throw out our instruction? Let's go to the next one. Again, interaction, and how do we group our students so that we can get the maximum interaction out of our students? So thinking about, a lot of people really have this, I don't know, I think that cooperative students, cooperative learning only has to be all heterogeneous. So if I have 4 levels of language, I have to have level 1, 2, 3, and 4 in my group. Well, what happens if you have a level 4 in your group and you have a level 1 in your group? How much interaction do you think the level 1s are going to be able to do or feel comfortable with in producing? A lot of times what happens is that the students with stronger language level skills take over those types of groups. So again, thinking about how you put groups together. So maybe you put 2s and 3s together. Maybe you put 1s and 2s together. Okay? Maybe you put 4s and 5s together. Of course, there are times when you might have a heterogeneously grouped cooperating group, and that's fine. But again, how is it that you put your groups or your pairs or your trios together so that students are comfortable in interacting with each other, and and then also really then interacting with the content of the lesson that you're teaching? Okay, let's go to the next one. And this is a hard one for all of us, I know, because we only have this amount of time and we can't be waiting on the people that are, and we know that our second language, many of them are translating in their head, and it takes them a while to figure it out. They're translating what you just said, translating, and then putting it back out, translating it again to put it in their second language. We know that takes time. But again, that whole idea, whenever you have thrown out a question and the student that you might have called on, or maybe all the students, you have that deer in the headlight looks, like nobody knows what you're talking. You're speaking Greek right now. So what could you do? I think pair share. So again, giving those opportunities, if things are not, students need a little bit more time. If you just give them time to go into a think, pair, share, where they actually can kind of share what they're thinking, because a lot of times, sometimes they're just shy and they don't want to say because they might be wrong. But again, so a think, pair, share works really well with wait time. And then you can get on and, they have feeling more confident about the answer that they want to talk about, and then moving on to the next part of your lesson. So again, I know sufficient wait time is hard, but think about think, pair, shares for that for sure. Ample opportunity to clarify again key concepts in L1 with the aid, with the peer, with an L1 text. So important, and that's obviously part of our language preparation. When we think about our supplementary materials, when we think about our adaptation of content, these components all kind of flow together. So again, when is it that they can have time to interact again in both languages, primary and then their second? Okay.
Wonderful, thank you. So with all those wonderful tips and content pieces that Dr. Chavez gave us, we know that when we're teaching, you teachers are doing it every day, we know. Just thinking and pre-planning those opportunities to interact with students. And like Dr. Chavez said, not only the teacher interacting with students, but also students having an opportunity to talk to each other. More than ever is important to have that wait time and make sure that when you ask a question or you have a prompt for students to discuss in those breakout rooms, that you continue to provide those sentence stems and frames for there to be able to start those conversations. So whether you're opening the chat box or you're in a breakout room, whether you have an adult who can moderate those conversations or not, just remembering to provide those supports to students because they make a big difference. And also, of course, when you're teaching synchronously, make sure that students feel comfortable using the chat box to enter the responses if they know how to write. Again, for older students might be easier. For younger students, they can still type in a number or something, so showing them how they can interact with the content that you're teaching. And also you can unmute, like invite them, remember to unmute and say, who wants to give this answer right now? Usually you can see your students' faces during a synchronous lesson. To just remember to put those in your lesson plans. When am I going to stop and give opportunities for students to converse and answer questions? And something that I really like when you're teaching asynchronously, we also can build opportunities for students to interact with each other. We know in CISA, for example, the teacher can leave feedback. So students complete their assignments. CISA provides with a lot of tips on how to provide feedback to students. And I think that this is a great opportunity. Again, this is something that I'm applying with my 5-year-old, and I know how much power it has because you can model for your students how to provide feedback to each other, how to provide constructive feedback and say, if I'm looking at somebody else's homework, I can say, I like how you drew this and I appreciate you using this word that we're learning. Or asking each other questions and saying, how did you come up with that idea? Or can you tell me how you found that font that you're using in your assignment? Or whatever it is, I think it's really important that we teach and give opportunities, students opportunities to interact while we're teaching live. And Dr. Chavez just were talking about, we have some students that are more shy that might not participate a whole lot during a live lesson, but there might be opportunities for them to provide feedback with the teacher and also with their peers. I think there's a lot of power and a lot of value in that because they're practicing language, they're expressing orally or in writing. So just as a teacher, just remembering to model those and provide students with the tools to do it. So we're gonna move along. We have about 7 minutes left and we have one more piece in our agenda, which is review and assessment.
Okay, I'll fly through that one. And it's really, I wanted to point out that we all know that, you know, that we have to have some kind of at least a formative assessment for each of our lessons. What did our students learn? Where do I need to go tomorrow? Who needs enrichment? Who needs remediation before I move on to the next part of my curriculum, next part of this unit, the next part of this 3-day lesson, whatever. So, but really when we think about sheltered instruction, what is different and what is critical for our second language learners is that there needs to be a comprehensive view of the vocabulary that students are going to need to complete the activity, right? So we need to be thinking about as we wrap up our lesson, I guess not the activity, but again, as we think about the wrap up of our lesson, the closure of our lesson, we need to be thinking about, okay, one short little review summary of our vocabulary words that are pivotal to my lesson today, the lesson I'm going to tomorrow. So again, that review of vocabulary should be part of every sheltered instruction, the closure of any sheltered instruction lesson. We also think about the key concepts. So how are we helping our students summarize the main ideas? How to summarize the learning from the CLO? That also has to be a part of our lessons. I think in general, most teachers know about this one. Again, summarizing the key concepts, the main ideas of our lesson, our CLO. But again, too, bringing it back, how is it that we are going to help our students summarize their learning? What did you learn? Did you hit the target for today? And then again, back to specifically, how did my students do on that content and learning objective? How is it that I can gauge that in some way? So when we think of at least, again, a formative assessment for every single lesson, just some examples of formative assessment in general. As we think about review and assessment, this is something to think about at the end of our lesson, but we also need to think about formative assessment throughout our lesson. What are students understanding? We can't wait till the end to see if they're understanding what we talked about, you know, in a 30-minute lesson. We need to understand what they understood at minute 10, you know, at minute 15. So again, just some ideas here about that formative assessment. Again, checking for that understanding, providing opportunities for students to let us know. So whether that means, I think I have some examples on the next slide, but again, so important to gauge that not only in the closure of your lesson, vocabulary, key concepts, checking in on that content and language objective, but also thinking about throughout the lesson, how you're gauging understanding. That's so important for our second language learners, our emerging bilinguals. And then here's just some informal ways, some just suggestions. Again, when I was in the classroom 5,000 years ago, I loved my dry erase boards. And I know that now but I love to use those. Again, the thumbs up, numbered 1 through 3. Pencils, you can do pencils, pencil up, pencil down, pencil in the middle if you're not sure. Again, number wheels are great too, that you have different responses on them and student can move their wheel to whatever they're at with regard to their learning for that day. So again, just some informal ways to assess, and again, back to the importance of that formative lesson throughout your lesson. That's it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So for doing it remotely, we know that Pear Deck, we mentioned it before. If you want to learn more about Pear Deck, on Saturday, we're going to have some interactive slides where we're going to use it. And if anybody would like to learn more tricks about how to use it, please join us at the cafe. It's wonderful, especially for the older students. We also have Kahoot. This is a great tool to do kind of like a quiz where they can respond in very visual ways and the teacher can get like immediate an idea of how many students are getting the content of the lesson or not. So this is very easy to use. We're also going to be using it on Saturday. So come join us. Then like Dr. Chavez was saying, like students can still show us things on the screen, right? The slates haven't gone away. The whiteboards are wonderful. If students are doing a longer response, if you're working on writing with them, for example, they can write whatever, you can guide them. And then when they're working independently, as they finish, they can take a picture and email it to you or upload it to their platforms. So nowadays it's pretty easy for them to share their writing, but you can still see that they're interacting with the content of your lesson. When it's shorter responses, we can also, like Dr. Chavez was saying, they can show it on a whiteboard and show their response or show their fingers. So it's a way for students to make sure they're engaging and they're still doing something as you're teaching. And we're moving away from the technology. They just have to have their cameras on and they can still show their work. A slate could be also a white piece of paper if students don't have it. We know some teachers have provided supplies for students. Some students have to use whatever they have at home. So there's a lot of different ways, like the pencil that Loretta was just mentioning. So that's all the content that we have for today. We made it just on time. Hopefully we met our goals of analyzing the why and what it is sheltered instruction and why it's so important for our bilingual and emerging bilingual students. And going through some resources, you also have them in your note catcher. And we thank you very much. We know everybody's busy, but thank you so much for joining us. We hope to see you on Saturday.